Good morning and welcome to Joy Lee Live. Today we have the amazing Krysta Dancy with us today. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and a brain spotting trauma expert. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you.
So nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. So this is a little bit more personal than it is probably being so excited about offering in another one of our 8 dimensions of wellness. But today we're talking about the intellectual part of the 8 dimensions of wellness. And of course, the brain has a lot to do with that. And so I wanted to talk about brain spotting today. So I had Googled all over and looking for information about what is this thing called brain spotting, and Krysta was the first video that came up.
Really? That's so funny.
Isn't that good news?
Well, it's funny because it's a video I actually made for my clients. I didn't really intend for it to be seen widespread, but that's what I'm hearing. You know, I don't know how these algorithms work. Like if I wanted to make that happen, I probably couldn't have.
I think it's just cool because a lot of people were responding and they had questions and it was interest, and you were right there responding back. So
I'm glad it's helpful. Yeah.
Since then, I've watched a lot more of your videos, especially the 2-minute ones about what trauma is and all that kind of stuff. So the reason I sort of dove into the idea of brain spotting was because my daughter, who's had some depression issues and all kinds of other things, had some success. And I've noticed her, you know, really being a different human and not sleeping all the time and all kinds of other things. So
that's really neat.
Yeah, so
I'm hearing that.
I'm building a project called Joy Lee, and I felt like I was getting stuck. And so I said, you know what? I've processed, I've done all this stuff, I've done all the work, I've had talk therapy, I've done light therapy, I've done it all. So I said, I don't have anything to lose. I'm always game. So on Monday, or Monday it was of this week, actually, I had my first brain spotting session.
Oh, cool.
Mary Jane Rourke from Portland, Oregon.
Cool.
And she went right to my trauma, which I broke my nose when I was 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
And all kinds of stuff came again that I never thought I would ever think about again.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, the next 3 days, I've gotten more done in the last 3 days than I have in the last 3 months.
That's really cool. Yeah. I hear that a lot.
Like the fear of picking up the phone, like, I don't know, just like I've been thinking about that change on my website for so long, and I called my web designer and it was done in 10 seconds, you know?
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
It's funny how like we have this kind of story in our mind about how like the thing is impossible to do. And then suddenly, boom, it's just not impossible anymore. And so I think it's like, to me, that illustrates how we get in our own way, right? It's not that it actually couldn't be done. There was like our own block for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. I have a bunch of questions for you. So would you just start by explaining your background a little bit and how you got involved in brain spotting? And then if you could include also if brain spotting is one of the main modalities that you choose or therapies that you choose.
Yeah. So my background is I've been a licensed therapist. I've been working with clients for about 15 years. And my specialty is in trauma, or also called PTSD. That specialty sort of found me in my early days as an intern. I was really lucky to have veterans with combat trauma in my office and just fell in love with the work with them. About 10 years in, though, as that trauma modality kept expanding and more people came to me with different kinds of trauma, it ended up becoming specialty also in like traumatic birth experience, which is where a lot of people will see me online. When I was about 10 years in, I got to this stuck place, kind of like you're describing, where it was like, I have these really insightful, I'm very lucky, I have these really insightful, intelligent, often high producer, overthinker clients who are just incredibly insightful and analytical. And they could sit in my office and we could have these great conversations where we would really dig down to like what the block is, where this comes from, where the trauma comes from, where the injury comes from, why they're stuck. And then we'd all agree and it was a great session, and they go home and they do it again. And then they come back in frustrated with themselves. We'd have the whole same thing happen again. They go out and they have the same reaction again, whether that was like a trauma response reaction or just other ways of like being stuck in repetitive patterns that aren't good for you. And so I started to reach outside of just talk therapy at that point. I'd been doing talk therapy for about 10 years. I love it. I still think it's valuable. I still think insight is valuable. But with my particular clients, it was like this wall that we couldn't get past. So that led me into, I started adding an understanding of hypnosis. That led me to EMDR, which is a really well-researched trauma modality. And then that eventually led me to Brainspotting. So Brainspotting was founded by David Grand, and he was an EMDR trainer when he discovered the specifics of Brainspotting. So they're very closely connected in the way that they work. And I would say those are my two favorite ways to work with trauma.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's good. Just kind of a good refresher. So, so of course we're talking about joy. My whole company is about joy. And you were like, well, I do a lot of trauma patients.
I know. I do a lot of trauma, which you doesn't naturally think of linking with joy. Yeah.
But I feel like I fall into the category of a trauma, even though it was a broken nose. And I sort of, for some reason, never thought it was trauma or labeled it that or that big of a deal, really. Right. But it disfigured me for 30 years, right, before I got nose surgery. And so it was a big deal. I couldn't look in the mirror. So my question is, what would you say to people who are, maybe feeling stuck, or they think that maybe they're like, should I try this, or is this something that I could handle?
Yeah.
For me.
So, obviously there's no one thing that's for everybody. So that's my caveat, right? Like not everybody likes everything and not everything's a good fit for everybody, but I would encourage you to try it if you're considering it. One of the things that's nice about it is that it's not a long-term treatment modality. It's not something you go on and on and on and on and do. It's something you can try within a few sessions and decide if it's helping or not. And so I think that's really attractive compared to like a traditional therapy model, which is typically a longer term. You can do a few sessions of Brainspotting. And like you said, you did one session, you felt a difference, and now it's worth it for you. You could do 1 or 2 sessions and make a decision about whether it's worth it. So for that, I feel like it's worth the gamble of that 1 or 2 sessions to see if you like it. I often see people not only get what they were hoping to get out of it, but then get so much more. Like they're surprised at how many things are connected to the place they were feeling stuck and how many places they're suddenly feeling freedom and feeling lighter. And they're like, wow. So yeah, within 1 or 2 sessions, you're either going to love it or not. Most people love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get that. And I get why, but maybe if you don't mind, if you could just explain a little bit about the process. So it was
like the mechanics of the process.
Yeah, it was really scary for me. And I thought, well, before I make an appointment, I watched 35 videos and it was like, what do I have to do? And it's so odd.
It is really odd.
Yes,
even now, I've been doing it for years at this point. I still tell my clients, like, I get it. If I hadn't seen the science behind particularly EMDR, I would not believe it. I would think that this is silly because it is odd, but the science is there. So I'm glad that it's there. So one of the main components of both EMDR and then specifically Brainspotting is this idea of bilateral, which meaning stimulus on alternating sides of the body. We know that that's an important part of processing. So like one of the examples people use is REM sleep. When you're in REM sleep, your eyes go back and forth. You're alternating sides of the body. We know that it's linked with your brain processing information. And so the way that Brainspotting particularly does that is usually through audio, unless there's like a hearing loss issue or something, you're going to use headphones with alternating music. It turns out to be nice for multiple things because at first it sounds weird, but after a couple minutes, you start to get used to it and not notice the alternating as much. And it starts to kind of fade into the background. It's really soothing and really calming for people anyway. And so it's just already that's like a positive experience and helpful to the emotional process of it. The other mechanical piece with Brainspotting, and this is the discovery of David Grand, is that where you look affects how you feel. And this is something that people can even do in their home. There's no like hocus pocus to it. If you think about a particular subject that elicits a strong positive or negative reaction for you, you can experiment with looking center, looking left, looking right while you think about it. And you'll probably notice that when you're looking in particular areas, the emotions either get stronger or weaker. So we just exploit that in Brainspotting. We find the eye position that elicits the response we're really trying to work with in order to help bring it to the forefront. And then we're using that bilateral, the audio the whole time to help process it. So that's like the oversimplified version. Obviously, the training process for professionals is very extensive. That's why, like we're there to help you. But as a client, that's what you can expect. You'll have headphones, you'll have a fixed eye position. And then the idea is that you're going to work through the emotional content of what you're experiencing with a lot of body awareness. How much you talk really depends on your temperament as well as the therapist's. I've had some clients who are very quiet for long periods of time, and I allow that because I know they're doing good work. And then I have other clients who talk the whole time because that's part of how they process what they're experiencing. Both are normal, but that's what it looks like.
Yes, exactly. And when Mary Jane was doing it with me, she just was, you know, we had to do it visually. So she was just like this, and she was looking right into my eyes. It was a little uncomfortable, but after we got going, you know, we were 60 seconds into the call and we were already, you know, so she's like, tell me when you were 8 years old. And I was like, oh, good gravy. And it was that exactly. It's like, do I need to be talking? And, you know, it was really just the process of being like, what am I supposed to be doing? But your therapist is so good at helping you through wherever you're at.
Yeah, it's a pretty extensive training process. So they should be able to give you those little tiny pieces of guidance of talk here, don't talk here, go there. There's a heavy emphasis on noticing both your body and your emotion. And that's because we're trying to get out of what they call like the frontal lobe, the parts of your brain that are really rationalizing and really storytelling about it. That's the part that you're like more aware of. And that's the insight parts of your brain. We're trying to get into the parts of your brain that are emotive and experiential, where you're feeling and sensing your reaction. And when you have change on that level, when you have change on the level of like the frontal lobe, you have this insight. So let's say that the trigger happens, you can talk yourself down and you can cope with that, but you can't stop it from happening. When you start to do change on the level of like the midbrain, then your reaction changes. You don't have to think about it. You're not forcing it. You're not arguing with yourself anymore. It's just sort of naturally shifting. I think that's part of what's so fun about it, because when you suddenly have that natural shift, you start to notice you feel better in a lot of ways.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I know it's client confidentiality and all of that, but maybe you could just share a little bit about your joy with the work. And I don't know if you could share like maybe some specific things that have happened, you know, generally for some of your trauma patients. And then also if you could just speak to if someone has a performance block, like if there's just you know, they can't ask for money or the whole sales thing, or they, you know, whatever it is, maybe some athletics or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I was thinking in preparation for our conversation together, like where joy fits into this for me. And I think probably that one of the things that I've learned by doing this with clients is that I think joy is sort of a natural outcome of making space for all of the parts of ourselves. One of the things that I talk about a lot with clients is that you don't get to pick and choose which parts of your emotions and experience you make room for. You can't say, okay, I want joy, but I don't want sorrow. Okay, I want happiness, but I don't want sadness. If you cut off, then you cut off everything. You're either numb or you're not, but you can't pick what you feel and you don't feel. And so I think there's something that is the outcome of Brainspotting, which is a place of like contentment or peace, or for some people even joy, that happens naturally when you kind of just make a seat at the table for all of the parts of your experience. None of it has to be cut off or amputated. And when we do that, there's this free flow. I think like children are a really good example of this, right? Our natural state is a free flow of emotion. We get sad, we get happy, we feel joy, we feel pain. That's natural. We as adults start to intellectualize and compartmentalize and create blocks of what we will and won't accept. And I think that when we get into a brain spotting space, people aren't coming into my office to say, I want to feel joy. They're coming into my office to say, I want to get out of this trauma response. But what ultimately ends up happening is they make room for connection. They make room for joy. So, you know, trying to protect, in case any of my clients ever see this, I don't want them to feel like, oh, she's talking about my session. But speaking broadly, I've seen people come in, for instance, for PTSD, and then later email or call me and say, today I was with my family, and for the first time, I felt it fully. I felt it. I felt the connection. I felt the love. Today I was with a friend, and I found myself realizing that I was laughing and crying with them and sharing space with them in a way where I was present in my body and I was present with them, and I didn't know I wasn't until now. And so while they may or may not connect that to the word joy, to me, that is joy, that space of being able to be fully present, fully embodied, fully connected to the people in front of you. I think that's really powerful.
So powerful.
Yeah.
You have no idea how powerful that you are connecting. And joy to me is all about connection.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if they can be connected to their family and their friends and just go to sleep with a little sense of belonging or loving, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. One of the things that happens with trauma that we don't even realize I think of it like if we have an injury, we start to guard the injury, even if we don't mean to, right? If we have a twisted ankle, we start to walk with a limp, even if we don't mean to. And part of physical therapy is actually to teach you to stop guarding, to teach you to start using proper body mechanics again. I think it's similar emotionally. When we have trauma, we start guarding. We don't know we're doing it. It just hurts so bad. We start to do stuff to try to get away from the hurt. And the outcome is we start to cut off. And then we can't connect and we can't be present and we can't be in our bodies. Right?
Yeah. And it just goes along so well with what I'm doing. And the whole evolution of becoming your best self and living your potential. And most people just kind of settle. And when I ask people what their joy is, they say, my grandkids and my kids, and that's good.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's something left on the table a lot of times. If you get them talking, they'll tell you like, I love to make jewelry. I've always wanted to have an Etsy store or whatever that is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You had asked another question. I just realized I was trying to think of it while I was talking about the performance piece. So when people come in and maybe they've come in for trauma and so we've done the trauma work, or maybe they don't have any trauma that's really impacting them. They're coming in more for like reaching potential, right? It's more of a positive focus of like, I want to remove blocks from, for instance, my creative self or my performance self or my athletic self. Like I want to perform my best. There's all this fascinating science now that we have these great tools and we're able to see the brain working in ways that we weren't able to even a decade ago. Or even 5 years ago. What we're learning is that your brain really does not distinguish between what you're imagining and what you've done, which is just this fascinating discovery. If you imagine something or if you do it to your brain, it lights up the same way in the same parts of your brain. And so there's this great application of techniques like Brainspotting where you can utilize it almost in a meditative space to help process through any blocks as you're, for instance, picturing the performance you're trying to achieve. And it's so fascinating because people just think, oh, that sounds easy enough. I'll just imagine hitting the ball. But what's interesting is the particulars of your brain is that the blocks will come up. They will go to try to imagine hitting the ball and they'll trip in their own imagery. Someone will come out and lecture them. Someone will come out and criticize them. When we're in that space of like the midbrain, all of a sudden the blocks that we maybe were somewhat aware of but didn't fully understand are like presenting. And then we have this opportunity to in vivo, in live time, process through that block until they are able to actually meditatively imagine the success they're seeking. And what that does is now their brain, as far as their brain is concerned, they've already done it. They've already achieved it. So it becomes that much easier, right? Like once you get a success, it's easier to get another success. Once you've mentally gotten a success, it's easier to get that next success. So that's where you can like connect with creativity and that sort of thing.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I bet. So do you remember where you were when you heard about Brainspotting and you said, I just need to do this?
Do you know what's funny is I was so fortunate. I had a colleague of mine who knew all about it and was working on becoming a trainer in it locally to me. And she said, she basically needed me to help supervise in a space. And she was like, I need you to be trained in this so you can supervise. Will you just come to this training? And it was very last minute and I didn't know anything about it. And how lucky, right?
Yes.
And I went into the training and I was like, I love it.
So is there like 13,000 trainers now, or not trainers, but therapists and 6,500 trainers or something like that?
I don't know the numbers. No,
okay.
I know that it is growing every year.
Yeah.
It's really taken off. It's amazing. Yeah.
I've been communicating a little bit with Dr. Mark Grisky out of the UK, and they're doing a fall training over there. Dr. David Grand is going to go. And so I just think it's fascinating. I'm just so happy it's growing, and I want to do whatever I can to help spread the good news.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to share a couple of little things that happened to me, and maybe you could just talk about, once you're done, like I'm happy to go again and again and again, but maybe there's a point where I will say, well, I'm stuck again. I need to go figure this out. But for right now, every day I wake up and I'm just excited to approach the same things that I've been approaching for the last 3 months with this new thing that's going on. So like, for example, I was talking with a person, and what I would normally say is, and his name was Brian, and we were talking, and I said, I'm going to send you over my business plan and this and this and this. And what I would normally say, and I was just going to do that, and I stopped myself, and I said, Brian, what I normally say is that this is very overwhelming, and I can be too much for you. So if it's too much, just
yeah.
And I stopped, and I said, wait a minute. This is the most exciting thing. We're spreading joy across the country, and I hung on every word in that business plan, and I think you will too, right? And I was like, did that just come out of my mouth? Like, oh my God. Yeah. And then all day long, there was just, we're talking about having chief joyly officers with these chairs on platforms in New York and, all over the country, so people can sit in them and talk about their joy and just kind of go through the formula of find, be, share, and process their own joy and ask the universe for what they're wanting. And I called Denise, and she's like, I was so scared. She's the most beautiful woman, and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I would absolutely love to hear about that. And I'm like, really? And I've just been thinking about that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
I think it's a question, but what would you?
Yeah. So to me, that what that speaks to is I'll have people come into my office and they'll say like what's a really simple way to say this? Okay. So sometimes I'll have people come to my office, and part of the reason they're in my office is because they're really lonely and they want partnership in their life, and they've had relationships that have not gone well. And so there's this insight that like, hey, there's some way that like I'm the common denominator. I can't get these other people into therapy with me. I'm going to try to figure out what's going on with me so that I can have a better relationship. But one of the things that happens with that is there's this precipice at the point of therapy where they're doing this great insight work, but the partner's not arriving yet. And they're kind of, likely to be like, well, it's not, the problem is outside of me, right? The problem is that there's no good men left. The problem is that there's no guys who are interested in what I'm offering. The problem is I'm too old. The problem, whatever it is in their mind, the problem is. And what I tell them that they don't believe till the end is, I've had this conversation so many times now that I wouldn't believe it if I were you either, but I know it to be true, that when that block is removed inside of you, it will move, it will shift. And I don't know how, and I don't know the way it will shift yet, but I know that it will. And I think that that's a really good example, the one that you're giving, where it's like, you didn't even probably realize you were talking yourself out of a yes in some of those ways. You didn't probably realize you were, that you were going to kind of I always say like, put an asterisk by what you're saying. Like, well, this might be too much for you. And this might be like, you maybe didn't even realize that was happening until it got unblocked inside of you. And then suddenly that free flow of enthusiasm makes connection with opportunity. And I don't know that it's mystical as much as it's just sort of mathematical, that like if you're going out with enthusiasm and feeling connected to self and feeling good about where you're at and putting that out, that connectability out, that like it comes back, people respond to it, right? So yeah, to your point, like I totally believe that it wasn't even necessarily what you went in for, and then you had the fun pleasure of getting to be like, oh my gosh, look at that, I didn't even have to fight with myself about it, I just got to let my enthusiasm flow, and that attracted people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm so much of a newbie in asking new questions, but does it continue to unfold like that?
It can. Yeah, because so the example you're talking about, if you were my client, one of the things that I would point out is that if it happened at such an early age, and then it has all of these I like think about it almost like tentacles, right? Like I have writing on my hand. Think about like these tentacles of like, there's this core experience, but then if it happens at a young enough age, there's all of these outcroppings of things that occur as a result, this domino effect of things that it impacted that you maybe didn't even realize that it was impacting, right? And so when you get unblocked in something like that, it's so fun. It goes on and on, the ways that it just keeps dominoing in the other direction. That's right. Amazing. So like what you shared about, I don't want to put you on the spot, but to like use your example since you brought it up, if you're talking about like, hey, this had all of this multiplied effect because I didn't want to show my face. It probably impacted how I felt when I presented myself to the world. Mm-hmm. There's all of this body memory around like how I pulled back and how I felt maybe uncomfortable or how I felt something negative, that as that continues to domino and feel less of that pullback, less of that discomfort. Yeah, I think that it can go on for a while, which is really fun. I mean, right? Because it's like maximum impact. Like, wow, I just did 1 hour or whatever it was of work. And then, I mean, here I am still enjoying the benefits of it, which is super cool.
Yeah.
I love that about it.
Yeah. And I told my doctor or my therapist, I said, pushing the record button, doing things like this just scared the bejesus out of me. And so And so it's been really an amazing and beautiful opportunity. I'm so glad I stumbled upon it. So it's not really just, so who is it best for? And maybe, I know you can do this via video. It works perfectly fine virtually. And who is it best for, and how might someone benefit during these uncertain times that we're going through right now? Like, we shouldn't be putting ourselves on hold is my understanding of that.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that. Yeah, so who can benefit from it? A lot of people. It's really very versatile. I mean, EMDR started out specifically as a PTSD modality. As it's evolved, as science has evolved, as Brainspotting has come onto the scene and evolved, we are finding that it has all of these other applications, like performance applications or sleep applications or OCD applications or anxiety or depression applications. So it can be applied in a lot of ways. And like I said, the stakes are pretty low. You try it once or twice, you either like it or don't. I mean, it's pretty clear to you if you like it or not within a short amount of time, and whether it's worth it or not. In this time, this is what I've found myself saying as I'm helping coach my clients through this time and my interns through this time and all of that. Whatever your particular trauma trigger is, and we all have them, right? Because none of us have lived perfect lives and none of us have been loved perfectly. Somewhere along the way, we've been wounded. So whatever your particular wounds are, I feel that COVID-19 and the pandemic of it and the shelter-in-place orders, it's in there somewhere. Right. I thought it's just sort of this symphony of triggers is the way that I look at it. It's like, is isolation a trigger? Is abandonment a trigger? Is loneliness a trigger? Is scarcity a trigger? Is anxiety over your loved one's safety and health a trigger? And on and on and on. Right. So because of that, we are having collective triggered responses right now in our community. And when we're in a space like that, what happens is we pull back. What happens is we shut down. We find our energy zapped. We find ourselves short. We find ourselves numb or irritable or tired. We find ourselves not able to connect with the people in our home, not able to think beyond this moment, feeling doom and gloom. Our sleep gets disrupted. Our eating gets disrupted. We start doing addictive, comforting behaviors because we're trying to self-soothe. And there's no shame in any of that. This is a natural mammalian human reaction to feeling under threat, right? And we have messages of threat coming every day right now. So I would encourage people not to wait, because this is something that can be done virtually. If you go to the Brainspotting website, they have lists of people that are trained in it. And it can be done through video very effectively. Like you saw, you got great results out of it. You didn't have to be physically in the office with her. What I believe, people who will say like, well, what's the point? I just need to wait for this to pass. I say, or the other option is that this is bringing to the surface things inside of you that really need healing anyway, right? And so that we can look at this as like, here's a chance to heal this because it's triggering this in me, or we can look at this as I'm just going to wait it out. I would much rather see my clients look at it as an opportunity to heal something inside of them, because number one, when this is all over, it's going to be worth it and it's going to pay dividends. You're not going to ever regret healing. But number two, as you continue to go through this, because this may last for who knows how long, to be able to get outside of the trauma response, outside of the triggered response, outside of the shutdown or the agitated or the numb response, means that you're able to connect with the people in your household. You're able to connect with people online. You're suddenly out of frozen. You're out of the fight and flight response. And that's going to be better for your health, for your immune system, which we're all concerned about right now. You're going to be more creative, have more free flow while you're stuck wherever you're stuck. So I just don't think that you're going to regret that. You're not going to walk away and say, I wish I hadn't spent my time and energy there. So for me, don't wait. Don't put yourself on hold, because now is the opportunity, right? You don't want to look back and say, gosh, if I'd had this sooner. So I think that, that's my pitch about it. I wouldn't wait if you have that chance.
Yeah. And I know you're, can you hear me all right?
I can.
I don't think you're taking on any more patients at the moment, or?
No.
Okay.
No, so, I'm full.
Like you said, Brainspotting is something that's the brainspotting.com is a website that people can go to find the therapist. But I thought it was extremely affordable, especially considering the tens of thousands of dollars that I've spent on gurus over my lifetime, on self-help, and in the thousands and thousands of hours on, I love meditating. I love it. I do it every day, 2 or 3 hours a day. So it's really, really important practice. But as far as breaking through, like, this is just another little big tool to get people to where they need to be, and especially if there's sadness or depression or anxiety, like all kinds of reasons.
Yeah. And I don't want to say it's a cure all again, like that's my caveat,
Yes.
but what I just said this to a client this week, if you break an arm, if you break
Yes.
your arm, if you set the arm heals. That's what the arm does. It's not about belief or faith. It's just science. If you set the arm heals because that's what arms do, right? If you give the brain what it needs, the brain heals. That's what brains do. It's just what your mind wants to do. Your mind doesn't want to be stuck. Your mind doesn't want to be burdened. It wants to heal. So it's really neat to kind of tap into that and just kind of remove the block and then go, oh, wow, like, yeah, I can do this. And it doesn't have to be a fight every day.
And it also wants to be quiet. That's why we got the chair for our stage. Like people just need to, this is just sort of an icon, if you will, to remind people to sit still and think and breathe and be quiet and look for the answers inside instead of outside, like I've done my whole life.
Oh, that's my favorite part of Brainspotting is that at the end of it, when we've removed the traumas or the hurts or the blockages, like the insights come from within. And I could have said the same thing to my client 80 times. And it wouldn't have mattered as much as the answer coming from within, right? And when we arrive at that answer at the end of our healing process, that answer is internalized. It's not knowledge up here, it's knowledge in here. And suddenly we can make use of it, right? So I think that goes back to that quiet. At the end of all of this road, we do all this process trauma, process pain, process wounding, and it gets into a space of quiet. And in that quiet, there's a knowing. We know. Yeah. Right? How do I know we know? I know we know because if you're giving advice to your best friend, you would tell him or her the answer that you should end up telling yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? We know on an intellectual level, but we don't know in here till we get quiet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so enough about Brainspotting. Okay. That was really fun. So I just want to throw out my little slide here that I was talking about just a minute ago. But the Joyly formula is the find, be, and share. And I do interviews all day long with people all over about getting them to find or discover their joy, be their joy more often during the day, and share their joy. So my questions are to you about this formula. So finding your joy. Yeah. Can you just tell the audience a little bit about how you discovered your, being a licensed and family therapist? Like, what was your trigger to get started in that field?
I always say, like, I fell backwards into it. I was really lucky. I didn't know that I wanted to be this, actually, because I had an idea in my mind of what a therapist was like, and it wasn't me. And so when I decided to go back to grad school, my intention was actually to go more of a consultant route, like more of an organizational industrial psychology consultation route. I had no intentions of doing any one-to-one therapy. But I discovered when I got into the program that I had to do some to complete my program, that I had a practicum piece that I had to do. And so I found a mentor who was amazing and connecting and saw potential in me beyond what I was able to see in myself. And went into my first session so nervous and then shut the door. And it was just like water in a desert. It was just like water in a desert. It was like a fish. It was like a fish taking to water, right? It was just like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is amazing. So for me, it was this backwards thing that seems like, I don't know how I got there, but the truth of the matter is I think that anybody who continues to strive will eventually find that spot where they land, right? It's a lot of like trying on shoes that don't fit and having the courage to say that shoe didn't fit.
Excellent.
I'm going to keep going.
Cool.
Yeah.
So fabulous that you found your joy. So then you got going and you were being your joy every day, meaning you were showing up, you were doing the, the consultations, and you work a lot with mothers, right?
I do.
Life.
Yeah, I do.
Talk a little bit about that. Like, how were you being your joy? Like, how long have you been doing this?
Which therapy at all? 15 years.
Yeah. So how have you been being your joy for the last 15 years? Like, what does that look like or feel like joyfully?
Yeah. So for me, I think it really goes down into a deep body experience. I, again, found my way into working because I had the privilege of working with clients and they became my gurus. Like they taught me as I went, right? In my early days, especially. And so I kept having these moms come into my office that I felt so connected to. And they kept exhibiting all the signs of trauma that I now knew because it was a specialty of mine, but it didn't quite fit because I wasn't taught it was supposed to show up in birth in that way. And so that unleashed a curiosity for me. I started like seeking out experts on the subject. I started asking people about the subject and finding there weren't any answers. And where it ended up was with me saying, I have no place to send them. I have nothing to give them. I'm going to have to figure it out. And so what I would say is it turned out to be my joy, but the way that I got there, I think to me, it was so closely aligned with love. It was out of like love for those people. I loved those people and I couldn't leave them hanging. That led me down that intellectually curious path. And then I ended up becoming a birth attendant. I attend births as a birth doula from time to time. And that was where I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
That's so cool.
Like, how amazing that I get to be here at this moment. This is unbelievable. This is like heaven and earth meet in one space for a moment. It's transformative. So, but again, I found my way there because it started with like love and it started with frustration. Like, I love these people. I'm frustrated. There's nothing for them. I'm not going to accept that answer. Right. And then joy ended up at the end. This must be my process because that's sort of how I ended up a therapist. That's how I ended up with this specialty. Like, there's agitation for me at the beginning and that propels me.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. So the last is the sharing. So real joy gives us a sense of connectedness that we automatically want to bring to others. So here we are, you know, being on this call and sharing on a live stream. But what else does sharing look like right now for you in your world or in the future when it comes to teaching, facilitating, volunteering, or creating even more of what you're doing? Is there a book? Is there something going on?
Yeah. So I got to this place where I just couldn't keep up because the more I talked about it, the more people wanted to come in, the more full I was, the more I talked, it kept growing. So where I'm putting my energy into sharing now is I started out last year doing online training for other professionals, how to do what I do. And that's where it started. Then that training group took off to a way that I couldn't expect, which I think happens when you're in a flow, right? When you're in flow with your joy, with love, I think it just happens that it has this energy to it. So that took off. This year, I've started hiring other therapists, other medical professionals who have expertise beyond my own to help exponentially grow that. So my passion right now is in making particularly maternity care, but all medical care really trauma informed. And what I mean by that is that medical policies and decisions making is happening in a space of humanness, that we are realizing the human needs of people holistically, not just to set the broken bone, but the whole person, both in care for the provider, because providers have a great deal of trauma, nurses have a great deal of trauma, and then the patients themselves, to make that whole thing loving, infused with trauma-informed care. And so that sharing piece is actually just exponentially blown up. I think that's how you found me, because I think you said like well-traveled on the internet. I'm just teaching all the time, because at this point, the more I teach, the more it comes back, the more it comes back, the more I need to multiply with the efforts that I'm making. And it has this synergy to it that I couldn't have even really mapped out a year and a half ago. It's just being in the flow and following where that sharing is going.
You're like the epitome of joy, Lily. Like you're my favorite human today, and it's really, really fun.
I'm enjoying talking with you too.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said yes. And we have a speakers bureau, and maybe that's something that we might talk about in the future. So we call them sages. So they're people who.
I feel funny with that label on me, but it's a nice label.
It is nice because it's like they love to show up on stage. They feel they're humorous, but they still have a really strong message. And it's not necessarily about you specifically. It's about that people need to hear what you have to say. Really.
I think that's the key, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And being in that space of like being pushed forward by the message, I think is just, it's way more fun than being pushed forward. When I get into a space of like my own fear and insecurity, and then that gets very nerve-wracking very quickly. But when I'm in a space of being pushed forward by the message and the value of what I have to offer, then I just get to be like along for the ride, just as much in awe as everybody else. Like, wow, this is really fascinating what's happening.
Absolutely.
And I think that's like the space to be.
How fun. Yeah. You have arrived. There is no doubt. So you don't have to answer this, but I'm just curious. How many times have you done Brainspotting on yourself?
Oh, on myself. Do you mean to myself or like as a client?
Oh, whichever.
So are we including EMDR in that? Because I started out more knowing EMDR. So if we include EMDR, a lot of times. Because Brainspotting was a newer technique.
Okay.
Oh, I'm a big believer. I mean, for starters, I work with high trauma incidences all the time. So I have vicarious trauma through the work I do. I was so close to burnout. I would not be in front of you right now if I had not discovered this.
Okay.
And so over the years, I'll go in because of stuff that occurs as I attend birth. I'll go in for stuff that occurs in my own personal life. I'll go in for stuff that occurs interpersonally with me and my clients. And then I did my own initial therapy on like my own stuff before I even walked down this path. So I couldn't probably count accurately for you.
That's
a lot of it. I'm a big believer in it.
I love it.
People think that's strange, but to me, it really highlights that there's like no guru here. This isn't about like knowledge. Having the knowledge doesn't make you suddenly better. Just because you read all the books, you're not suddenly better.
Yeah.
And so I say, like a massage therapist probably needs a massage. They can't really massage themselves. It's the same idea. Like a trauma therapist needs their own support. They can't support themselves.
Yeah.
It's not about knowledge, right?
Yeah. And I think if we could all just lighten up a little bit about ourselves and knowing that our imperfections are exactly like the next person and we all have them, and it's to be celebrated and to be worked with and on, and not necessarily, just thinking that you're one in a million because you're not.
Oh yeah. Like I'm very suspicious of therapists who don't go to therapy.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest. I don't say that a lot, but I'm a little bit like, yeah, because it to me, if nothing else, it's such a good experience to be on the other side of the chair. It's such a good experience to just remember what it is to be on the other side of the chair. Let's just start with that. But then there's all the accumulated trauma, and we're all human. And oh my gosh, I'm going through a pandemic too. I'm giving therapy to people through a pandemic virtually, but I'm also going through a pandemic with my own family. So
exactly,
we're all human beings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was just going to say something there. Hold on. It's gone. But anyway, if you could say anything in our final moments to just people who are just out there listening, as far as their brain and what they can do just on their own to take care of themselves and get through this pandemic, what would you say?
Oh, I've got some videos with some strategies. So I'm trying to think I can say that in a quick format. Right now, when we are inundated with messages of threat and danger, but the threat and the danger is sort of ambiguous. And what I mean by that is we can't see it. We don't know when it will be over. We can't control it completely. What happens in our brain is our brain goes into a state of fight and flight and freeze, and it doesn't know when it can come out. Because there's no all clear signal. There's no signal that says, now you may relax, right? Because if we turn on the TV, you turn on the internet, we talk to our friends, it's everywhere. It's completely saturated us. And so because of that, our brain is constantly getting signals of threat and never getting the signal that we can take a deep breath. So what I encourage you to do is take hold of that and do that for yourself. The reason is we were never meant to stay in a state of fight and flight indefinitely. It's not good for us. It's not good for our immune system. It's not good for our biology. It's not good for anything. So fight and flight was meant to be short term, run away from the bear, fight the lion, move on with your life. It was never meant to be days and weeks and months of being in fight and flight. It starts to make us go sideways. It has a lot of downstream negative effects. So what you need to do, whatever that is, if that's yoga, if that's a run, if that's therapy, if that's Brainspotting, if that's meditation, the idea is that we need to tell our body that we need to signal the all clear. Okay, body, you don't need to be in fight and flight in this moment. In this moment, you are safe. In this moment, there's nothing to be done. In this moment, you are healthy and well. And by centering back in that, we can help our bodies do their best. We'll sleep better, we'll eat better, we'll connect better. My best, most favorite strategy for this is any kind of breathing exercise that emphasizes the exhale. Again, that's a reflex of the autonomic nervous system. The exhale is related to the other side of the autonomic nervous system that's not fight and flight. So just by breathing in a way that you elongate the exhale, you do that 1 to 2 minutes, you're already shifting your brain state. So what I'll tell clients to do is I'll say, breathe in for 5, out for 5, then breathe in for 5, out for 6, breathe in for 5, out for 7, in for 5, out for 8. Work your way up to in for 5, out for 10, and hold it there for like a minute. Just in for 5, out for 10, in for 5, out for 10, and then check in with yourself again. And what you'll notice is that you've sent a signal to shift out of that high alert phase. And that's my recommendation to you right now. Be very present, be in your body, be with your breath, and give your body the thing that the external world's not going to give you right now. The external world's not going to tell you that it's okay to relax, but your body needs to. We can all feel it in ourselves at this point. Your body needs to. So that's my recommendation for how to get through this. And then, like, obviously, if you have the opportunity or the resources to connect with a therapist, do it. But either way, the breathing is going to help.
I love the breathing. I wrote that down. Five in, say all the way up to 10, and
then just continue that. Yeah, because that exhale, it's almost like if you hit your knee kicks. If you exhale in an elongated way, it switches your autonomic nervous process. You don't have to like do any special thinking. You will just do it. Your body will automatically do it.
And it's something that can be done 10 times a day, right? Like you can just remove yourself from the situation, and if you're, frustrated or whatever, and your anxiety, just go breathe a bit.
I do it all the time. I did it at the beginning of this interview. You can't tell. You can't tell that I'm breathing differently. I look the same, hopefully.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so one of those little things that happened again just before when I said, I don't remember what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Like, remember? So prior, remember, it just happened, Cheryl. But prior to this interview or prior to Brainspotting, I probably would have said or gone away and, crashed because I was like, why couldn't I just remember that one thing?
Aww.
But in reality, it's like, we all do that. You don't need to beat yourself up for those little things. So anyway, while you were talking, I remembered my question. So if you don't mind, this last question, back to Brainspotting, just a minute. So for our intellectual and brain health, is it something that Brainspotting could be like going to the chiropractor or the dentist? Like you could go just not because there's anything necessarily wrong, but just go routinely?
Yeah. I like to use metaphors of like physical health. So sometimes culturally, people have this idea that therapy is like for the very wounded or the very broken or the people who aren't coping in life. And I think, well, that's like saying the doctor is only for heart attacks. That's not accurate. We have all different ways of maintaining ourselves, right? And so therapy can be like the ER. It can be like acute crisis. It can be we're dealing with something acutely and helping you stabilize. That is definitely a use of therapy. But what is also a use of therapy can be compared to like going to your general practitioner for a physical, getting checked up and making sure that all systems look good and there's no spaces of concern. Therapy can also be like going to the gym, right? We don't wait to go to the gym when we're sick. We go to the gym as a way to promote health and wellness. And therapy can be a promotion of health and wellness. And I don't think that that's talked about enough, that even once you've worked through all of your stuff, there's still a space where it can be something you check in on to just remove the gunk that happens, right? Because like life's not perfect. Hard stuff happens. We have losses, we have pains, we have traumas, we have rejections, we have moments where we feel insecure or lose ourselves. And so keeping that sort of promotion of health attitude, I think that there's like a really good use of therapy. And one of the secrets that I believe that it's not talked about enough that I see behind the scenes is that for people who are highly successful, most of them approach therapy in this way. They start out doing it as like a way to work through trauma, and then they end up sticking with it as a promotion of health, much like meditation practice would be or going to the gym would be. So yeah, I think that those are all valid uses. Is therapy the only way to wellness? No, absolutely not. There's a lot of ways to wellness, but it's one way. It's one practice, if you will, of self-care and wellness for sure.
Oh my gosh, beautiful. So this was Krysta Dancy, everybody, from Roseville, California. And do you want to share a website or anything with our audience?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, they could go to my web. I'm trying to think which website. If they go to counselinginroseville.com, counseling in Roseville, then from there you can find some of the other stuff I've got.
Well, actually, I have probably, 30 links or something that I collected from many of your videos that I'm going to pop down and below.
Great. That's where I hesitated because I'm like, which website are they going to want to read? I don't know. That's probably a good place to start.
Well, you're a fabulous resource, and I really appreciate you being on our show today.
Thanks. This was really fun. Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome. Everyone have a good day.